Path of Exile 2 is bringing one massive change to the in-game that has gotten some people a little upset. I think it's actually a pretty great change, but if you've never played Path of Exile, this might be something that makes you a little bit nervous. Now, if you've played games like Dark Souls or Elden Ring, you're not unfamiliar to games that give a significant challenge to pursuing, or rather achieving, whatever the goal is of that game. Maybe it's a special item you're trying to acquire, maybe you're just trying to beat the game, or maybe it's some kind of secret or hidden boss that you have finally found or unlocked or what have you. I personally, whenever I play something like Dark Souls, I enjoy spending 3 or 4 hours endlessly dying before I finally cry, and then eventually maybe actually beat the boss, or I just quit and never play it again. So there's a pretty significant change happening in Path of Exile 2. Let's dive into it and look at some of the gameplay we have here in front of us. So this is, by the way, just like a random YouTube video that I pulled up of a boss fight from Path of Exile 1. I think this was from years ago. The channel here is called James White. He has 3 subscribers. I don't know why YouTube gave me this as the first result, but shout out to James White. I'm using some of your gameplay footage that's on YouTube. And to give a little bit of context, we're not going to get into any of like the heavy details of what's happening here in terms of the story. But just know that this was taken a few years ago at 720p. Path of Exile 2 is definitely going to look much better today than it does in this video. Now, one thing right off the bat, this is the change that's different in Path of Exile 2. In Path of Exile 1, whenever you spawn an in-game map where you go, which if you've never played Path of Exile, think of it like an in-game dungeon. You get these 6 portals that open up. Now, the party limits in Path of Exile 1 is 6 players. So you could, I think it's 6 players, right? So you technically have 1 for each player, but if you're playing solo, you can go in and out 6 times total. When you take a portal, that portal disappears, leaving the 5 remaining. So whatever loot you find, whatever items you locate, whatever happens, you have 6 portals worth to be able to go back to your base and drop off those items and to continue to go back in the dungeon and keep farming items. Now, for bosses, which there are some dungeons that kind of like Diablo 4, where you go to a dungeon that's only a boss like Duriel runs or what have you. In Path of Exile, there's also maps or dungeons that are only that boss. Now, in Path of Exile's terms, these are called pinnacle bosses. They often give the best items. Sometimes they give you special currency items that you can use to adapt your gear even further. I won't get into that today, but the basic premise is that 6 portals, you have 6 lives basically to go in and out of that dungeon. Now, if you've never played Path of Exile before, and by the way, I'll just kind of skip to what I was going to say before I get farther into the weeds for it. In Path of Exile 2, you don't have 6 lives, you have 1 life. You have 1 life in that dungeon, and if you die, the dungeon's over. Especially if it's a boss fight, if you die, you've lost your chance. Now, some of these bosses take quite a bit of currency, quite a bit of items to actually unlock and do. A great way to think of it would be, assume you have a boss, an incredible boss who drops an amazing item, but to unlock that boss, you need 4 keys to be able to open the door to that boss room. Well, where do you get those 4 keys? There are 4 other bosses that are all very difficult that each drop one of those keys. Once you get those 4 keys, you can then go fight that pinnacle boss. So imagine how much anxiety there is around this kind of boss fight, knowing that if I lose my 6 portals, not only did I fail the boss attempt, but I failed after spending a lot of time and effort getting those 4 keys. Those keys are gone, okay? So in Path of Exile 2, you have 1 life, and if you die, it's over. So what I'll do, I'm gonna spend a couple minutes talking about why this is so important and why the game's gonna become so much harder. And then I'd love to know what you guys think about, is this a good change? Is it good for the game? Is it going to turn people away from Path of Exile 2? Or just like we have people who are gluttons for punishment for Dark Souls game, are we going to see a rise of people who really love this feature because of the masochism around spending a lot of time on something and dying and failing. So all that to say, if you haven't played Path of Exile 1, maybe you've only played Diablo. I actually haven't played Last Epoch other than a few hours.
It's happening, isn't it?
But one thing I will say about Path of Exile is that the boss fights are fairly complex. There's lots of different things to watch out for and be mindful of. And if you make a mistake on these mechanics, they will one-shot you. They will kill you. It's a lot like if you've done Diablo 4, maybe you've done Uber Lilith, where like the spike waves are coming through, and if you don't dodge them, then your character's dead. You failed the attempt. But unlike Uber Lilith, again, you don't have endless attempts. You can only go in one time. So what I'll do is I'll just skip to a part of the boss fight here and turn the audio off. So of all the things you have to worry about, you have, first of all, two bosses you're fighting at the same time. One of them has, look at this, these big golden orbs that will kill you if they touch you. You also have this other boss. Oh, and also the giant, massive golden beam that if it touches you, you're dead. You have the boss in the middle who's sending out, you can't really see it in the video, but he's sending out little ice spikes to kill you as well. And then there's a point in the fight, let's see if I can get to it here. You see this ring around the middle here? If you step outside of this ring, you die. Now, not immediately. The boss is doing a channeling ability where if you're outside of this middle ring, it instantly kills anything outside of it. But all those mechanics that you saw from this other boss, who's called the Shaper, who's sending the orbs, who's doing the golden beams, that's still happening. So you have to dodge all of that while staying in the ring, while dodging the little ice spikes that this boss is sending out. And then, oh, also one other mechanic. Let's skip ahead so you can see it here. There's also, I don't know if you can see on this video. Here we go. These big void circles that if you stand in that, you lose health and eventually die from those as well. So Path of Exile 2 is supposedly having even harder bosses, which this is considered, by the way, a fairly easy boss in the grand scheme of things. There's bosses that are much harder than this pair. There was a time years ago where this was seen as like the pinnacle of bossing in Path of Exile 2, the Uber Elder and Uber Shaper fight. Now, this is nothing compared to what's in the game today. Apparently, Path of Exile 2 has said that they have the developers have said that you have even harder bosses, the hardest content they've ever had today. Which brings me to wanting to ask you, is this good for the game or not? One of the pulls we know that exists for Diablo is the fact that it is so casual, it is so easy to get into, and it seems to work for Blizzard. On the flip side, you have something like Path of Exile, which is mechanically complex. It's a very deep game. You often need a guide to know what you're doing, and that can be a major turnoff for people. Well, now it seems they're going even heavier in that direction with having one life per map, per dungeon, and one life per boss fight. Is this good for Path of Exile? Personally, I think that Path of Exile knows their customer, they know their brand, and I'm all about leaning in on that, leaning into who your player is. It would be like if Satisfactory or Factorio, which has a style of gamer that plays it, if they suddenly came out with like an easy mode, hey, we're going to automate everything. You're going to click a couple buttons and it's going to automate building and I've actually never played either of these games, by the way. This is like total secondhand knowledge. So how I'm describing this may be like, okay, you clearly never played this game before. But these games that are like very mechanically intense, if they came out with the mode that was just like, hey, we're going to take care of a lot of it for you, we're going to make it a lot more casual, I don't know how well that would go. Or if Elden Ring 2 was like, hey, you know, we have the easy mode, but I think instead we're going to make our bosses have 1 HP. And we have a mode where they attack 1/4 of the speed. That kind of stuff, I just don't know if it's the right thing for the right customer, and it's worth thinking about. So, all that to say, what do you think? Good for the game or not good for the game? All I know is we're in for a treat of a very hard, a very challenging Path of Exile 2, and a reminder that early access drops on Friday. So we'll see how it goes. See ya.